Okay, everybody, I think that gets us to 10 o'clock. And so let's get started. And just to make sure you're in the right place, this is the very exciting launch for the Serving the Future website and toolkit. My name's Russell Gunson. I'm Head of Programs and Practice at the Robertson Trust. And we've been really delighted to fund the Serving the Future project for the last 3 or 4 years now. And so really excited to hear a bit more about the final report and toolkit today. In terms of the agenda today, I'll just say a few words of introduction in a second, then hand over to the Serving the Future team. So we've got Laura, Kirsty, and Brody from Serving the Future. We've got a short video, and then Kelly from Springboard and Lawrence from Skills Development Scotland, followed by Q&A. And we'll be using the Q&A box for Q&A. So do get your questions at the ready, either now or as they occur throughout. In terms of just a few words of introduction, the Robertson Trust, the reason I'm chairing is that we've been, as I say, very excited and delighted to have supported this work for the last 3 years. But to be honest, I think we'd be really interested in this work regardless of that. It's work looking at how we can make sure that pay and low pay can be a secure and preventative way out of poverty, particularly looking at hospitality. But to me, this is an important area that often gets overlooked in general employment, in general low pay in Scotland in the debate, but in particular in some of those sectors that can often get overlooked when it comes to economic interventions. There's win-wins here. If we can get pay and productivity up in hospitality, we can boost the economy. We can also reduce poverty too. But it's also a high impact area because there's a really large level of employment and a fair amount of low pay within that. And the really crucial thing about this work is that it's really implementable. So it's important, it's got high impact, but it's really implementable. And I think the more applied this type of work can get, the better. So again, really excited to see this. Beyond that, I think what I'll do now is be quiet and let the team take over in terms of talking us through the work and talking us through why we're here today. So I'll hand over now to Laura, to Kirsty, and to Brody to take us through the launch.
Thanks very much, Russell. Hi everyone, my name is Kirsty. I'm from the Fraser Valander Institute. I work as an economist there. We're really excited to be hosting this webinar. We've been working on the Serving the Future project for 3 years now, and we've got 1 year left where we are implementing the toolkit that you're about to see today, and evaluating that and making sure that it's something that can last through the long term. So a bit of background about Serving the Future. Russell's already introduced it fantastically, but I'll go into a little bit more detail. So Serving the Future is an action research project focused on understanding, reducing and preventing in-work poverty in the hospitality sector. So it aims to support both businesses and employees through research-driven insights. So what we were really interested in doing when we first came to the Robertson and suggested this kind of project was to ensure that both employers and employees are benefiting from interventions that can support workers to escape from in-work poverty. We wanted to have sustainable solutions for the hospitality sector that benefits everyone, and that allows the sector to continue contributing to Scotland's economy. So as Russell said, this project is funded by the Robertson Trust. We're part of the Partners in Change programme. So there's a range of programmes that are currently going on across the UK and across Scotland that are being delivered by various partners. And this one in particular is being delivered by the Fraser Valander Institute at Strathclyde University and also at the Poverty Alliance. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start with some of our key findings, and then I will pass on to one of the other members of the team to continue. So I think, first of all, what we wanted to talk about today, which is also being launched at the same time as the toolkit, is our final longitudinal report from our research. So what we wanted to do when we spoke to workers in this piece of research is we wanted to gather more evidence on in-work poverty and low pay experiences over time. There's a lot of kind of cross-sectional sort of single point in time evidence about in-work poverty and low pay across Scotland and across the UK, but there's less of a longitudinal nature, and this is where we really felt that we would be adding value to kind of understand what are the difficult points over time for people, how do people move in and out of low pay potentially over time, and how can we sort of ensure that change happens and is sustained over time. So the methods that we used in order to speak to hospitality employees was semi-structured interviews. We spoke to 27 hospitality workers between 2022 and 2024. So each worker did 3 interviews with us over a period of 18 months. The recruitment was originally targeted to 2 local authorities, but we decided to expand that due to sort of challenges in recruitment and finding enough participants. So we expanded to Edinburgh and other remote parts of Scotland. So we've ended up with a sample that kind of covers the wide areas of Scotland. Next slide, please. So in terms of the people we spoke to, we had a wide variety of roles in this research. We had front of house staff, we had back of house staff, such as KPs and cleaners and chefs. We also had some staff who were in management positions or in supervisory positions. So quite a wide range of roles in the tourism and hospitality industry. And we had a wide range, as I said, from both urban and rural areas, which we felt was really important since hospitality is such an important sector, particularly for Scotland's more rural areas. In terms of the work conditions of those who we spoke to, in the first wave, we found that around 1/3 were on 0-hour contracts or didn't have a formal contract. So that means 2/3 did have a contract that was not 0 hours. So that was quite encouraging for us, but we were obviously thinking about how we could discuss 0 hours and kind of dig into that a little bit more. You can see in this diagram on the right here, we started in wave 1 with 27 participants, and we did have some attrition, which is the black at the bottom there. But we had lots of different changes throughout the waves, which is kind of what we wanted to capture. We wanted to see who was getting new jobs in the industry, who was staying in the same role or increasing their hours, who was reducing their hours, and who was leaving hospitality. So by wave 3, we had almost half of our participants that were still remaining in the study had left hospitality, and we had a further 5 that had reduced their hours. So we did see a lot of moving away from the industry, which we found was quite interesting. And you can read about more of that and more of the detail of that in the report. So very quick limitations of our study. Obviously, we have to talk about sampling bias and attrition. So one key sort of potential sampling bias here is that the study may overrepresent vocal workers, those who want to say something about their role. And of course, in longitudinal research, we always have the risk of attrition, and we did have our participants decline over time. So by the time we were in wave 3, we had 16 participants when we started with the original 27. But we were glad to be able to hold on to that many. And something to note also is that these findings are obviously context specific. We were doing this research between 2022 and 2024. So we were seeing the aftermath of COVID-19, Brexit, and the cost of living crisis. And this was impacting both employees and employers. And we've talked about these effects specifically a bit in the report further. Next slide, please.
Oh, hi everyone. So as Russell mentioned, my name is Brodie Gillen and I work as an economist at the Fraser Allender Institute, and I've been one of the researchers on this project. And over the next 2 slides, I'm just going to talk through some of the key findings from our new report, which is out today based on those interviews that Kirsty was just telling you about. So one of the core questions we wanted to answer in our research was what makes hospitality a good or a bad place to work? So through speaking with these workers over time, we identified 5 key factors that differentiate positive and negative experiences in the workplace. So the first one was supportive management and respectful workplaces. So workers who felt supported by their managers, whether through understanding their personal challenges, clear communication, or simply just being treated with respect, had far better experiences. On the flip side of that, poor management was one of the main reasons why people left their jobs or even the industry altogether. We found this was particularly prominent around holidays or high stress times. When the quality of the managerial relationship sort of breaks down a lot during this time, it became really challenging for workers to remain committed and often prompted them to reduce their hours or change jobs completely. The second factor that we identified was training and progression opportunities. So many workers told us that they wanted to grow in their roles, but few actually had access to structured training or career development. In some places where training was available, it made workers feel valued and more likely to stay. And you can see that in the report, we've got a couple of different case studies, and we had one case study from our participant, Jack, which you can see illustrated on screen there. And he told us about his previous experience in Australia, where he had quite structured training and regular feedback meetings, which he felt really helped him to grow and commit to his job. However, when he moved to Scotland, he found that these opportunities were really lacking, and it was one of the reasons that sort of drove him to leave the hospitality sector. The third factor that we found from our interviews was scheduling and work-life balance. So we kind of know that unpredictable scheduling can be a quite major stressor in hospitality, and some workers told us that they received their rotas with very little notice, which made it quite hard to plan their life. So maybe like just a day before the work week started. This sort of unpredictability often led to quite high burnout and high turnover. And it's important to also say there that sort of transparent scheduling not only affects work-life balance, but it also will impact financial stability of workers, which is the next factor in this section. So workers in roles with erratic hours often face fluctuating incomes, which really increase their financial strain. We know from our previous research in Serving the Future that the hospitality industry remains one of the lowest paid industries in Scotland. And some workers in our sample did struggle with financial insecurity, especially those that were on 0 hour contracts. People told us that some good things about pay would be transparent pay structures, fair wages, and some overtime pay. So, kind of important to see there, it's not necessarily just the rate of pay itself, but also how pay structures work in an organisation and what is expected of them at different levels. The issue of sort of salaried positions was also something which came up quite a few times in the research. So this was something where workers told us they took on roles with more responsibility in a salaried position, but they ended up working much longer hours and ended up feeling like it really wasn't worth it in the end. Another kind of big area that came up under sort of finances was tip distribution practices. So some workers described sort of inconsistencies in how the tips were allocated, with maybe managers taking larger shares or just sort of lacking transparency in how they're calculated. This kind of ties into the broader sort of next issue that we had, which was ethical practices and conditions within the workplace. So quite a lot of workers raised some concerns about quite lax health and safety standards. So for example, like wet floors without proper signage, being expected to work when sick, or sort of not making accommodations for different staff if they're maybe pregnant or not feeling well. They also told us that attempts to address these issues were often met with a lot of resistance. And that's kind of illustrated on the quote we've got on screen there from Jack when he says the attitude in hospitality is a bit like, we don't do all that admin HR stuff, but bureaucracy and those systems, they do exist for a reason. So things like employee retention. So overall, we kind of found that all these different factors can really positively experience people's experience in the hospitality industry. And when these elements come all align and come together, employees are more likely to feel valued and sort of stay committed to their roles and view hospitality as a viable long-term career, which brings us on to our next slide of findings. So we looked at what are the key challenges of sustaining employment in the sector. So as Kirsty mentioned before, a lot of our participants did actually leave the hospitality sector over our interviews, or they changed their roles within the sector. So we thought this was a really important question to look into. It's important to say for this that workers sort of choose to stay or leave their jobs for many varied and complex reasons. And we've tried to sort of summarise these into high-level themes, which you can see in the bullet points on screen. So the first one, we're looking at sort of job quality things. So that's more focusing on the actual role itself. And we found that things like fulfillment, social aspects, and autonomy were things that workers really enjoyed about their jobs when they had it. And they were actually things that acted as a buffer against some of the more negative part of their jobs. So participants who found a sense of pride in their work, who formed strong bonds with colleagues and customers, and also enjoyed a sense of agency in their roles. These were things that helped keep workers in employment over time and sort of acted as a buffer against some of the more challenging parts of a hospitality role. On the other hand, something which sort of led some workers to leave the sector over time was a lack of progression and future aspirations. So as we mentioned in the previous section, there's a clear absence of within industry progression in our sample. So only one participant was actually promoted within their original organisation during our sample. And no participants actually talked about building a career in hospitality when we asked them about their hopes and aspirations for the future. And we know that progression is clearly a challenging issue in the hospitality industry. So we do have structural constraints which limit the number of opportunities available. And some other stakeholders in our research have been really clear that hospitality has an image problem in the sense that it's not often regarded as a sector where people can pursue a long-term career. Our research shows that this feeling is also present in workers, and it'd be really good to have a consideration of how to improve hospitality's image and sort of importantly through that progression opportunities. And we think this would likely be of great benefit to the industry itself. Work quality was the next factor which we looked at. So work quality is kind of like a wider measure of job quality, and it looks at how work interacts with people's roles and responsibilities outside of work. So it's kind of considering work as one component or a building block in a person's life, which must complement different parts. So family responsibilities, hobbies, volunteering and socialising. And in some ways, as you can imagine, it's quite difficult to summarise participants' reasons for staying or leaving the industry as they're all quite deeply personal and related to their own individual experience at work. And we do discuss that in quite detail in the report if you want to take a look. But we found that a really interesting finding through this was that participants who left the industry during the research reported feeling a lot happier and less stressed in their new roles. And it's really important to note here that some of the participants actually took a pay cut when they left the hospitality industry and they still reported higher well-being. So we can kind of see that summarised in the quote on screen there as well. So we've got a quote from an older worker in the sample who says, "I think when I get to like my 40s or 50s, I can't be running around a kitchen anymore. So I have to make moves to change that within this year or next year," which kind of reflects the common feeling among some hospitality workers that the physical demands of the job combined with low pay and a lack of progression can make it quite difficult for them to imagine long-term employment in the sector. And then the final thing we looked at here was also that changing nature of the hospitality and tourism industry. So we know that the industry is really rapidly changing in the last few years due to cost of living crisis, Brexit, and the long-term effects of COVID. And these factors have created a lot of additional challenges for employers. And we've seen that these have filtered down to workers' experiences over time as well. So we had a lot of participants reporting that their employers were tightening their belt. And because of this, some participants decided to leave the industry because of these changes they saw. So maybe their hours were cut, or they had a lot of increased expectation from their employer or from customers. This was interesting, especially for us at Serve in the Future, as our previous research has found that some employers can actually benefit from involving their staff in discussions about financial pressures. So this could be one potential way to help sort of tackle this issue that the whole industry itself is facing. So I'm going to pass on to Laura next for the next set of results.
So thank you very much, Rhodey. My name's Laura Robertson and I am the Research Manager at the Poverty Alliance. I'm going to be specifically focusing in on the findings from our longitudinal research with workers in the hospitality sector and exploring key drivers and impacts of in-work poverty. So as part of Serve in the Future, we're particularly focusing on the hospitality sector because it is one of the lowest paid sectors in Scotland. And as a result, there are many households in Scotland who work in this sector who are in work poverty. And we know that there are many drivers of in-work poverty that are outside the remit of hospitality employers and are bigger policy and systems-wide issues. So I'm going to explore some of these key issues that came out of the longitudinal research that we conducted with workers. So in terms of wider drivers of in-work poverty, as previously mentioned, the longitudinal research interviews were conducted during the cost of living crisis and through the continued higher cost of living. All of the participants were affected by higher cost of living to varying degrees. Across the sample, about half of the participants said that they had not been able to save since the start of the cost of living crisis. And about a quarter of the participants were experiencing quite high levels of financial insecurity, evidenced by the fact that they were in different levels of debt across each stage of the research interviews. So what we heard from a lot of households was that because they were living often on overdraft every month, was that they were very much relying on friends and family to help them out in times of need. We were able to also ask participants about their experiences of accessing universal credit whilst in work, and just over half of the sample were receiving universal credit during the research. So there's some specific findings to highlight here in relation to how being in work that is often fluctuating in hours works alongside universal credit. And we did hear some important reflections from workers about how they could sometimes be uncertain and confused about how much they would receive on a monthly basis for their universal credit. We also heard some positive perspectives as well about how universal credit works for people in part-time and low-paid work. And particularly we heard from parents in the sample positive experiences of Scottish child payment, which was introduced and increased during the study, and parents shared with us that this had really helped them during the cost of living crisis. So in terms of key costs that households in the study were struggling with, the most key costs that they mentioned were around housing and also childcare, food and energy. And the majority of the workers reflected that the wages were just not keeping up with those increases in those costs during the project. We heard specific examples of women in particular struggling to go back to work after maternity leave and coming out of work in the sector because there wasn't enough to gain after childcare costs. So there's particular findings in the study around the impacts on gender and women leaving the workforce. In terms of public services as well, we identified that workers had a lack of awareness of knowing where to get support around employment issues and also around employability or training if they were interested in going into another sector or in progression as well. And we also heard from within the sample from migrants who in particular shared experiences of a lack of knowledge about where to go to get support from the social security system or from other services as well. So before I move on to the next slide, these are illustrations that are in our report published today. And one of them shows a single mother who was taking part in the research, who over the course of the 2 years that she was involved in Serving the Future had been in temporary accommodation and provided with housing that was not suitable. So she talked about black mould on the ceilings and on the walls of the flat she was offered. And you'll see in the report her long-term journey until she finally managed to get access to adequate housing for herself and her child. The other illustration reflects a particular participant who was in private rent and who was in rent arrears at each stage of the research. And at the end interview that we did with her, she was very concerned about rent prices going up in Scotland and what that would mean for her long-term security as well. So moving on to highlight some key recommendations that were made by workers during the interviews. So we asked workers what they would recommend in terms of local and national solutions to in-work poverty. So very much looking at policy recommendations alongside what they've felt that employers could be doing. So no surprise, one of the key recommendations was around childcare, affordability and accessibility. Excuse me. So in terms of recommendations around childcare, there were parents who wanted to see extended opening hours, so childcare that was open earlier and later in the day to fit around their work in the hospitality sector. We also heard recommendations about provision of childcare that is accessible to the workplace or in nearby to workplaces as well. Overall, though, the overall ask was around cost of childcare as well for 1 and 2 year olds where there's no eligibility for support with childcare costs. In terms of 0-hour contracts and job security, most of the participants said quite clearly that they felt that 0-hour contracts should not exist. They advocated for a legal requirement regarding minimum hours, and this aligns very much with what is being introduced with the new employment bill in the UK. So our findings very much support the need for increased security around contracts and hours. And lastly, in terms of transparent employment standards and oversight, for some of our participants in the study, they felt that there was an absence of clear standards and regulation across the hospitality industry that sometimes led to poor working conditions, for example, around health and safety or around pay and hours as well. So in particular, they advocated for government action around effective regulation of the sector, and also made other suggestions such as mandatory HR training for managers in the in the hospitality sector, as well as clearer policies within workplaces for addressing grievances effectively.
So okay. Oh, sorry, Laura. So we've come to our exciting second part of our webinar. So it's our new toolkit launch. And we're really excited to be launching this toolkit today with all of you, as we've been working on it behind the scenes for months now, and we're really excited to show you guys and hopefully get some feedback on it today. So this toolkit is an online resource which is made for both workers and employees and employers, and it hopes to pull together lots of different resources and advice into one place. So it's hopefully going to be a one-stop shop for tourism and hospitality. We've been lucky that this toolkit has been developed in partnership with Skills Development Scotland and Springboard, and you're going to hear directly from Lawrence and Kelly from those organisations very shortly. But first of all, we're going to show you a short video, probably because you're all sick of hearing us talk, that we've made to show you a little bit about what the toolkit is all about.
Scotland's fantastic tourism and hospitality industry is built on people. Every day, businesses and employees work together to create incredible experiences for customers and visitors.
We know how busy the industry is and how hard it can be to find the right resources, support and training when you need them.
That's why we've developed the Tourism and Hospitality Toolkit, a one-stop shop that brings together key information, tools and advice for employers and employees across Scotland's industry.
The toolkit is divided into two sections, one for employers and one for employees, so you can find the information that's most relevant to you. For employers, we've gathered practical guidance, case studies and expert advice to help you with the following areas: recruitment and retention, fair work and sustainability, training and career development, and navigating legal and visa requirements.
And for employees, the toolkit sets out where you can find clear information on your rights at work, financial and wellbeing support, and education and training opportunities.
This toolkit has been developed with input from industry experts, businesses and workers. It has been supported by the Springboard charity, Skills Development Scotland and Serving the Future.
People is one of the 4 priority pillars in our National Tourism Strategy, Scotland Outlook 2030. This toolkit has been designed to support the Industry Leadership Group's mission, which is to have a workforce of proud and valued people who in turn advocate our industry as a great place to work and grow.
So whether you're running a business, managing a team, or looking to build your career, the Tourism Hospitality Toolkit is here to help.
Let's work together to strengthen Scotland's tourism and hospitality sector for the future.
So now we've shown you that video, I'm going to pass over to Lawrence Durden and Kelly Johnston, who are going to share some reflections on the Tourism and Hospitality Toolkit and their involvement in the process of developing the toolkit. So I'll pass over to Kelly Johnston first, if that's okay.
Oh, me first, I think. Me first,
sorry.
Laura. There you go.
On go, Lawrence.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, I was just, my name's Lawrence Durden. I'm the Tourism Sector Manager with Skills Development Scotland, and thanks very much for inviting me along. I was just going to very quickly cover where the toolkit came from and I guess why it's needed. And it was originally developed, or a toolkit was developed during the COVID pandemic by the Tourism and Hospitality Skills Group with funding from Scottish Government. And it was procured by ourselves, and we worked with a company called J&G3 Limited, Jennifer Payne and her colleagues. And it was hosted on the Scottish Tourism Alliance website. So it's been around in a very raw format for a few years. But thank you to the Robertson Trust and Serving the Future for picking it up and developing it into this fantastic interactive toolkit and expanding it for employees as well as for employers. Why is it needed? I guess we've heard about some of the challenges the sector faces, and the sector faces many challenges at the moment, but there are also many great opportunities and real positives in the sector. And the toolkit, I think, for us is about helping to get those messages out to people, to potential employees, and to others. So it has a really important role in supporting the sector. The sector's faced and is still facing unprecedented challenges. We've heard about a few of those: the cost of doing business, the cost of living crisis, which is impacting people's disposable income to actually to take part in tourism and hospitality activities, and high levels of legislation and regulation. So it's a tough time for the industry. And it's also facing many skills and labour challenges. For example, recruiting and retaining staff is a big challenge still for the industry, not just for tourism and hospitality, across the economy, but it's a major challenge, challenging some of the negative perceptions that are out there about working in the sector, implementing fair work practices. Businesses all want to be fair work employers and support their employees, but there can be challenges around that, and employers need support around that. Digitalization and automation, AI, all of these things we hear about every day are creating major skills challenges for the sector, as is net zero and reducing the carbon footprint of the sector, and becoming an open sector for everybody, equity, diversity, and inclusion. All of these are challenges the sector faces. And management leadership was mentioned, the need to improve that, and the sector recognises that, as Mark Crothall said in the video there. But there are also great opportunities, excellent career opportunities in the sector, and opportunities to progress. And the sector needs to communicate that and tell that story. There are a whole range of skills initiatives out there: apprenticeships, modern apprenticeships, graduate apprenticeships, higher education, further education courses, private and third sector training provision. And it's a fun career to work in. It's I think, somebody worked in it for myself 10 years. It's a brilliant career to work in. We need to tell that story, and the toolkit's part of being able to do that. Employers, particularly small employers that don't have HR functions in their businesses, can often find the skills and training landscape difficult to navigate, confusing. Whether it's finding out about apprenticeships, whether it's about college and university courses, private courses, third sector courses, it can be quite difficult to navigate that. And employees, as we've heard, they need support to understand their rights at work, their career and education and training opportunities, and other support that's available. So there was a recognition that a toolkit puts in one place, somewhere that tourism hospitality employers can go to get that information and to help them navigate. It can signpost them on where necessary to organizations that can actually support and help them as businesses or as employees. And the term one-stop shop can be overused, but that's very much what we see it is, a one-stop shop for those operating or working in the sector. It will evolve and develop. We'll continue to update it, and I think that's the great thing about this project. It's something that can be updated as the skills landscape changes and things change. So it will be a continually evolving toolkit. And on a personal note, thank you to the Robertson Trust for supporting this, and to Springboard, and to Serving the Future for helping to develop, and for all the industry partners. I mentioned the Tourism and Hospitality Skills Group. The members of that group have had a key role in providing and advising on the development of the toolkit. So I will shut up there and I will hand over to Kelly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lawrence. Yeah, I mean, everything that Lawrence said, just echoing all your thoughts, but I'll probably start a little bit further back when I was first introduced to Serving the Future and the project that they had led, and some of the initial findings that the team have just gone over earlier this morning. I was sat on a webinar and listening to the sample of data that they'd gone through from the people that they'd interviewed. And I guess I came from it from another slightly different angle. Very passionate. I've always worked in the sector, with my hat on as the chair of the Tourism Skills Group, and also my hat as being part of the industry leadership group. I knew that there was so much good stuff that was already going on in the sector. Yes, there are challenges, but there was loads of activity that was going on. So I immediately reached out along with Lawrence and said, look, we know you've identified all these challenges and the feedback, but I'm sitting over here and I can show you all the great, rich stuff that's actually happening, both industry-led and, as Lauren said, third sector-led, education-led, employer-led. So yeah, that's kind of where we started. We shared the existing toolkit, which was mainly for employers, and yeah, we had a great collaboration with the guys at Serving the Future, and we've come up with this, hopefully what you think is a really good product. So it's to showcase all the initiatives and all the support, all the signposting to find information out for both employers and employees, and hopefully we'll spread the word of all the good activity that's going on out in the world of tourism and hospitality in Scotland. I guess as part of the video that Mark had mentioned earlier, so again, I won't cover all ground, but we as a tourism and industry leadership group are trying to drive Scotland to be, world leader in tourism in the 21st century, and key to that is people. And there's a people pillar, but under that there is a mission called Proud and Value People Working for Scotland that I am really pleased to lead on with Lawrence and work with a really good, amazing, passionate small group of people from the industry leadership group that also helped shape this toolkit and that fed into it. But not only that, underneath that mission for having proud and valued people working for Scotland, we have sort of key three themes there. Attracting and retention is one of those. So it's really important for the sector to keep hold of good staff, and Springboard plays a huge part in that. And I mean, top line figures for us in 1 year, we get our help 5,000 people across the UK into work. And something that really sticks out for us is that 76% of those people are still in jobs after 12 months in the sector. So we know that employers are looking after them and that those people are enjoying it, and that much so that they want to stay on. Another key theme that comes out of the people mission is reforming the education and training of our people. And again, that's something that we will try and influence on, but the toolkit really has a lot of links there for both employers and employees of good products out there in that sort of area. And then the last one is just influencing policy, which impacts the people that are working in Scotland. And again, that's the cross collaboration of the industry leadership group with other areas that are talking about transport, talking about accommodation, talking about the rural challenges, talking about fair pay and the policy that influences that. So again, it is part of very much part of the toolkit, and hopefully we are able to bring that through and continually to evolve that, as Lauren says. Under each mission, there's a set of game-changing actions that we try and follow, or we try and have impact on during the term of the industry leadership group, and the toolkit was part of one of those actions. So developing a one-stop shop. The landscape is very cluttered, and that was the feedback that we got from employers via the skills group. We don't know where to get the information or support or signposts. So hopefully this new, fresh, revised toolkit will do that. But also not just for employers, for the team and for people as well. And it is something that they can access if they've got questions that they maybe not getting access through their work. I guess lastly, it does showcase as well the great stuff, and I mentioned this a lot because it is, and I live and breathe it every day. The industry has amazing stuff going on in it, and it's probably something that maybe didn't come out through the survey purely because the employees didn't have access to it. But there's really good examples of employers in here that are doing great stuff for the sector, whether that's through employee assistance programme, through their own academies, through apprenticeships like Lawrence has said. We've got a great mental wellbeing and health resource through Hospitality Action, which has been around for quite some time. So again, it's just putting that in front of our employees and our team to make sure they can access that. Amazing learning and development opportunities there. From various different organisations, including Springboard, and there's lots of different links through third sector and also other different organisations providing that as well. And then lastly, in terms of what's the next step in my career, and we know that came up, we've got opportunities from HIT Scotland in terms of scholarship and learning and development. So we're hoping that will be able to be shared and give a wider access to people across the tourism and hospitality sector. And then lastly, just really pleased to be involved. I guess I kind of gave a bit of the story. I was sat on a webinar and I was like, we do great things. Let's try and obviously get it out there. So Springboard is really pleased to involve. It helps our new trainees. As I said, we bring trainees into the sector. We also do a lot of work in schools. So this toolkit will help us showcase in some of our careers and education chats what the sector has to offer and the support and the information that's out there. And then, I think Lawrence mentioned it. If we do another findings or fact-finding mission in the sector, we want to make sure that those dials have turned and we can demonstrate a bigger impact, that our people are proud and they value the tourism and hospitality industry in Scotland. So we'll build on the toolkit. We'll start gathering feedback just to measure the sentiment of what people do feel or how they feel like working in the sector. And it has been a great bit of collaboration, and looking forward to seeing it evolve. So yeah, thank you to everybody. Thank you to the Tourism and Hospitality Skills Group. Thank you to all the employers that fed in. Thank you to my team as well that helped feed in, and really was great working with the team at Serving the Future. So thank you, and I hope you all liked the video. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Kelly and Lawrence as well. That's great to hear your perspectives on the development of the toolkit. And I'm just going to move on now to share a QR code and the website address so you can all see the toolkit yourself. So please feel free to have a look around this just now. And I also want to highlight that we've got a feedback form on the website as well, and we'd really appreciate any feedback you have on the toolkit. So anything at all around anything you think that might be missing, that's not currently in there. Over the next final year of the Serving the Future project, we're going to be focused on disseminating and sharing this toolkit widely, along with Skills Development Scotland and Springboard and others. And we're really keen to make sure that it's a useful resource for both employers and for workers. So I will leave that up there for you to be able to access and get in to have a look at the toolkit. And move on to Q&A. So over to Russell, who's kindly agreed to chair this for us.
Thanks, Laura, and thanks everybody. So it was great to hear from the Serving the Future team, and likewise Lawrence and Kelly from their perspective. And the video looks great. I can't wait to look at the toolkit myself. And no doubt we've got some of our attendees off right now having a look at what's there. Do use the Q&A box to ask questions, and we can absolutely take that to the right person. Whilst we're waiting for questions to come in, I just thought, if you don't mind, if I can use some chair's prerogative to ask a question that occurred to me, and it's one that occurs to me often around employers' role in tackling poverty, or more broadly inequality, and it's the balance between compulsion versus voluntary approaches, the balance between supporting employers to stretch their good practice and spread it versus trying to challenge employers to do it. And I think this project and the toolkit is a really interesting potential balance between those approaches. But I just wondered if there's any reflections on that from this work so far, looking ahead to the toolkit. How do we get employers to stretch good practice? How do we spread that good practice? Is it voluntary? Is it compulsion? And otherwise, please get your questions into the Q&A box.
Yeah, I can take that question, Russell. That's a really good one. So I think something that's important to highlight from our research is that all the employers that we worked with really want to do the right thing, and it's just ensuring that they have the resources available to do so. We've heard time and again that employers want to do fair work and want to ensure that their employees are happy because, as we said before, it's a win-win situation. There's been a recruitment crisis in the past in hospitality, and we know that when employers are happier, they'll be able to hopefully stay in their jobs for longer and retention will be better. So I think for us, the majority really is that voluntary side of it. It's ensuring that this one-stop shop is available for employers, ensuring that all the resources are easy to access. We know from working with employers in our action learning sets as part of this research that employers are really time poor and are very, very, very busy, particularly those in small to medium enterprises, which is the majority of hospitality businesses in Scotland. So we want to ensure that things are as easy as possible. And we also want to recognise that employers can't fix everything on their own. We think that's a really important finding from this research, is that there are requirements from local authority and from government that are needing to be solved in order for people to have successful careers in hospitality. So some examples of that is thinking about childcare and thinking about accessible transport and also affordable housing. So those are some really important things that we don't think employers should have the responsibility to solve, and they are having very large impacts on employees, and that has a knock-on effect for employers as well. So particularly in rural areas, a lack of access to these resources for employees is having an impact on rural businesses too. So we do think it's really a sort of very much a minority of businesses that really don't want to do good things. The vast majority do want to do it and are just in a constrained position. And we're hoping that we can continue to collaborate with the skills group and to continue to collaborate across with the toolkit to ensure that we can get the resources to people that they need and create a more sustainable sector.
Steve. And we do have a question in to the Q&A, so feel free others to come back on that first question from me, but also there was a question here about sort of worker owned businesses or cooperatives and whether they'd come through any of the case studies that we've seen or any of the interviews we've done, particularly because there's evidence that that can improve, or that many of those forms of businesses have higher levels of terms and conditions. And then a broader one, which is almost probably where you're going to get to at the end in terms of how can we raise awareness of the toolkit and encourage its use. You'd like to take those two.
Do you want me to come in first? Just on the first question, that's really interesting. We didn't actually have anybody in that situation in the workers sample. I know that is something that's increasingly happening in the hospitality sector. So yeah, that is a really interesting observation. In terms of the other question around how we will be, was it around sharing the toolkit more widely? Yeah. I was just scanning and I was like, yeah, it's quite a long, long paragraph there. So yeah, we as the Serving the Future team are going to be really focused on attending events during the Hospitality Tourism Month, which is March. So we are going to be at the Scottish Hospitality Conference next week, and we will be sharing the toolkit there. We're also going to be ensuring that we're working with people like Kelly and Lawrence to make sure that it's reaching businesses across Scotland as well. We are looking to get, as I mentioned before, a lot of feedback as well so that we can continue to develop it over the year as well. So yeah, just encourage everyone who's attended today as well to please share it with your contacts. Thank you.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, Laura, but also just any socials that I think, I'm not sure what time, but at some point today there'll be a bit of a marketing going out on socials. So yeah, sharing the video and the toolkit link. So a wee action from us for everyone on the call, if you can please do that, whether it's on LinkedIn or whatever platform you prefer, that would be absolutely brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, and apologies, I've taken the QR code down now, so but we'll be sending a link to the website and the report to all the attendees afterwards, and yeah, they'll be up on the Serving the Future website as well.
Thanks both. Got a question from Tressa. So I think Lawrence, you mentioned EDI, equity, diversity and inclusion, and we should, particularly given it seems to be under attack in a incredibly worrying way in other parts of the world. But what came through in the presentations was around gender. I did have a quick look and there was sort of 9, so about a third of the sample size had ill health or some disabilities within that. Tressa's question specifically on disability, we'd probably take it to intersectionality too, but around, is there anything specific that you picked up on in terms of missing the talent that is out there in terms of the disabled population group, and anything that we can do or that Tressa's organisation can do to support that? So did you pick up on any of that in the research so far?
I'm kind of looking towards Kirsty because I know she's done a lot of research around this.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I don't think we spoke. We did speak to some people who would be classed as disabled under the Equality Act in our research. It was it was something that kind of interacted with work for them and was sometimes challenging. And some people had really positive interactions with their employers, and others had less positive interactions. So one example that we had that was really positive was a participant who suffered with insomnia due to mental health issues, and their employer worked with them to kind of start to do a later start time so that they would be able to kind of make sure that they were adequately rested before they were coming into work. So there can be some really positive things there. In terms of the sort of more those who are maybe not currently employed that are disabled and getting them into work, that's not something that we really looked at in this research, but we have done a lot on that in the Fraser Allender Institute. And we've got a section on our website about disability, so if you'd like to look at that more. But yes, Tressa would be really keen to have more of a chat about that. Some of our future work is going to be thinking about creating online resources for employers in order to increase the employment of people with disabilities in Scotland. So definitely reach out and we can have a chat about that more.
Just to add to that from what Kirsty said on the toolkit itself, if you take a look in the employer section under recruitment and retention, we do have a section on disabled workers and different sort of groups of people there with some information and then some links to different organisations. So if you want to take a look at that and then provide some feedback on it, if we're missing anything, if anything could be added, that would be really, really appreciated. Any feedback would be really welcome on the toolkit. So thank you so much.
There's also, just to come in as well, there's a section on the website where we share case studies with 5 or 6 hospitality employers. And some of those case studies have got really, really positive examples, particularly around mental health and providing things like counselling for workers. So yeah, there's quite a lot of positive practice out there, and we were keen through those case studies to share that more widely with other employers so they can kind of learn what other business have been able to do.
Thanks, everyone. We've got a question from Rebecca bringing in the topic of international workers and migration. So in particular, asking if there's links to other places that you can see for this toolkit, for example, to the Scotland's Migration Service. I think also I'd add that more broadly, certainly at the Trust, we're seeing certainly international workers on particular visas as an incredibly vulnerable group in terms of lack of worker rights or lack of enforcement of those worker rights. So more broadly, as well as that Scotland's Migration Service, I wondered if, again, you can pick up on any of the more migration issues that came through or international worker issues that came through, because I saw quite a few, including Jack from Australia, that I was very jealous about. Yeah, talk us through it if you can.
I'm happy to start off, but Brodie, Kirsty, please do come in. So we did have a few participants who were migrants, and they had quite varied experiences. There was one participant who has written a blog about their experiences that we'll be sharing next week, who had, when they first came as a refugee and went into the hospitality sector, had negative experiences and spoke about knowing that was quite widespread in the city that they were based in terms of exploitation of migrants, refugees in particular. So that was obviously a really troubling interview. And on the whole, that story wasn't present in the other interviews that we did with migrants. Obviously, they all had different journeys into the hospitality sector, and there was an overall finding, though, I would say that within that group there was less awareness of like things like social security entitlement, things like being able to access through universal credit, money towards childcare costs, and also in terms of where they could go to get support around careers advice or employability. In one interview in particular, I can remember that participant saying they just would not have any idea where to go. So that is troubling in terms of their long-term prospects in the industry, and in terms of progression for them. And thank you to Rebecca for highlighting that, and we'd certainly be keen to link the toolkit with the government team that are responsible for the migration service. So thank you.
Yeah, just to follow on from that, we've already got some links to Scotland's migration service, but happy to add the specific toolkit link. Definitely follow up with that after, and we're happy to add that. That sounds really useful for sharing.
Thanks, Board. And we got a question from Ben. I wondered if Lawrence and Kelly wanted to come in, but it's looking at the sort of good practice out there amongst businesses, and whether there's any common themes as to what makes a business much more likely to be adopting the best practice we see versus organizations that are maybe less likely to do that. I thought I'd work you, Lawrence and Kelly, just because the others have been answering questions more. But feel free to pass on if not.
I'll go first, Kelly. I mean, yes, there are great examples of businesses out there. What makes them great businesses is they absolutely get fair work. They understand that it's not just the right thing to do. It's also it makes business sense to be a fair work employer. It's not about compulsion. It's not about although there is increasing compulsion on businesses in terms of accessing funding, it's that understanding of the business case. That they're the businesses that I guess really commit. And I can give examples. I'll give one example of someone like Buzzworks, who they have a real commitment around their employee promise. They understand that it's not just about pay. Pay is important, but it's and a lot of businesses, when you talk about fair work, will immediately talk about the need to pay the real living wage or the requirements in terms of pay. But there's also an understanding it's about employee voice. It's about respect, providing opportunities. So they get that fair work is about culture. It's about listening to your staff, respond, and actually acting on what you hear from your staff. I think that's what really comes through from the good businesses. Lots of businesses do employee surveys, but they don't necessarily always act on it. It's saying, okay, we've heard what you say, and this is what we're going to do as a result. That's what always comes through to me. I saw Kat from Mercat Tours, on the call there, absolutely similarly, really committed to putting the staff. It's not just putting the customer first, it's putting the staff first as well. Because if you have a happy, motivated workforce who feel they have a stake in the business and enjoy their work, that will make the customers happy. It's kind of obvious, but so there are great examples out there. And I think we were talking earlier about what works in terms of this. It's getting those businesses to share their stories is really powerful, and having practical examples of what does it mean to this, when you talk about giving your employees voice, what does that actually mean? How do you do it? And it's also hearing from businesses about what doesn't work. Businesses often try things that don't work for one reason or another. Businesses that are, for example, we're talking about inclusion. Older workers is another group. The workforce, tourism hospitality workforce is still primarily much younger than when you look across all sectors. But older workers have so much to offer and to bring, and employers that get that and understand that they need to look at their recruitment practices in terms of, are there barriers there to older people? even thinking that this is a sector they can work in. And if you do have older people, and I'm talking about people like myself, you know, in the 50s and 60s, who have so many of the skills that the industry needs, are you taking account of their needs at work? They may have care responsibilities. Older people often have, you know, care responsibilities. They need more flexibility to look after perhaps elderly relatives and so on. So businesses that get that and do what they can to put in place systems and procedures to meet the needs of people, older people, people with disabilities, whatever it may be, they are the ones that have less problem attracting people and retaining people. So it makes business sense. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. If I can just come in there as well, I think Lawrence has nailed it. I guess from my organisation at the Springboard charity, we work with wonderful employers, and we always try and make sure that our trainees are directed in employers that do all of what Lawrence said, but we are increasingly seeing more flexibility for employers. So flexible, moving away from that traditional work pattern, the traditional working days. Examples we can give, we've run a few women-only courses to try and increase the amount of women in tourism and hospitality, and employers have been really specifically flexible around the time of starting shift, so possibly after the school run and then finishing shift before school pickup. I guess maybe we could say 5 to 6 years ago that was probably not even on the talking discussion, but now it's absolutely there, and employers are doing loads around that. Also going on to what Lauren said about age and different cohorts. I think where employers are finding success is that they are not just going down the traditional recruitment path. They're looking at different types of cohorts from probably different types of demographics across Scotland. And one of the areas that a lot of the industry is doing really well in, and recently we've had a lot of success for our trainees going into placements and the employer really wrapping their arms around the trainee. One I can mention is Johnny Walker Princess Street, which is the flagship Diageo store there that you know talks about whiskey but also is in a great attraction, with a young lady going there and really embraced her neurodiversity and set up a plan for her that would allow her to do a job and complement all her areas, and she's flourishing in there. So again, it's just about being brave, I would say, as an employer, and looking at different cohorts and working with different people. And then lastly, the innovative, it's not innovation, but it's something that we see success from all of the employers that we work with is good leadership. And leadership from, I guess, a grassroots level up. So it's that direct report level, supervisory level, making sure the team are skilled to deal with all of life challenges and all the barriers. We know as a charity that a lot of people, whether you're young or old, are coming through or trying to get into work with multiple barriers. And it's really important that employers understand that and have things in place like good employee assistance programs and also support from Hospitality Action and any wraparound services that are not just about salary and conditions. So yeah, that's probably. And then just I do think on the migration question, and sorry to jump in about a different subject, but I'm 100% sure that we stuck the link in on Scotland Migration Service. So Rebecca, if you can't find it, please reach out to Serving the team, but I'm sure it is in there, that they'll allow you to click through and get some more information. Thank you.
Thanks both. And that perfectly takes us to our last 3 or 4 minutes in terms of today's event. So massive thank you to speakers and to everyone who's attended and asked questions. I think I'm now handing over to the Serving the Future team to talk through next steps. So over to you.
Thank you, Russell, for chairing today and to everyone for joining us. So I've already mentioned we'll be sharing the toolkit and the report after the webinar today, and there will also be a recording uploaded online. So please do share widely, and yeah, keep an eye out for the Serving the Future team at upcoming hospitality events where we'll be sharing the toolkit as well. And over the next year, yeah, that will be our key objective, to get feedback on that and to continue to develop it in collaboration with the hospitality sector and with workers themselves. So thank you very much again for joining us. I'll actually put a link to the toolkit back up just so that people can see that as well, just before they sign off, in case they want to access it.
And thanks again. Delighted to see it happen today. Really look forward to seeing the progress over the next year.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Thank you.